Okay, so I was live for 20 minutes. It froze, kept giving me an error message. I tried to do it again, had to disable the app, re-able the app, and then I see it's still going live, and so I don't know why that is. So I'm starting this live stream over. That's never happened before. Maybe YouTube's playing with me. Well, they already have me shadow banned, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're messing with the stream. I know with Salty Cracker, YouTube would put his channel on slow mode against his will, and that YouTube does have the ability to mess with your streams right as you do it. So we're gonna try another stream, and I have the live chat because before I couldn't see anybody's chats. Chris, YouTube acts strange. Yeah, thank you for coming back. Yeah, so I didn't even know if anybody could see what I was doing, and if I have two double streams, I'll just delete the old one. Hey, Milahan, salam alaikum. Hopefully this works better. Yeah, I couldn't see anybody's chats. I was like, what's going on? It wouldn't show me how many people were there. It was so quite strange. So if I repeat myself, forgive me. I'll make sure this stream stays up, and I'll delete the other one if it's still going. YouTube been acting stranger and stranger with censorship. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about was embarrassment. And embarrassment is shame, awkwardness, and self-conscious, and the utility of that, and why women should not be shamed, or men, for emotions. And when people say, you know, you're emotional, you're this, like anything a woman says, essentially sometimes, gets categorized under the umbrella term of emotions, right? Shug says, I thank you for this live, and I see this severe left and red pill manosphere right both lead down to destruction and do not resolve the social ills. Instead, they feed them. Exactly. Thank you for coming back to this correct stream. The other one wasn't working. And so, let us examine the utility of embarrassment. And so, the utility of embarrassment is unique because it can also be a political weapon. As a political weapon, if you are trying to be the revolutionary, you're trying to be the counterculture voice, and you're surrounded by tyranny, by sheeple, lemmings, you name it, and you voice your dissension, they'll try to use social shame in order to get you to comply and to really put you in your place. And this essentially can cause quite a bit of problems for people who are really trying to actually make an impact. And so, in terms of a political weapon, shame has a great edge to it. Now, on the counterpoint, shame also has a good benefit to the society because it allows you to have some type of social cohesion and norms. And so today we don't have modesty as much anymore. Women could feel a sense of awkwardness and shame for being in a thong at a gas station, right? You'll see some women in a bikini and a thong and flip-flops, you know, buying some food from the taco truck. And it's kind of bizarre. Now, the anthropologist majors will say things like, hey, people in the past showed more skin, they were not as estranged to it, so why should we care? And is it possible to rid the body of its aesthetic beauty and allure? And I would argue no, and that we should have a culture where women and men feel a little sense of embarrassment and shame for some wacky clothing. But this is very difficult because when you have a pride group, Assalamu alaikum Ishmael, when you have a group that has no shame, feels no embarrassment, and you have a parade where there's like a pompous pride element, and then you see how they're in thongs, outfits, throwing glitter in the air, wacky clothes, doing really strange fetish stuff in the streets, that's something that has no shame. They have no shame for the people who see them, for the children who see them, for the old people. It's like, what's going on here? And so pride has overridden embarrassment. And embarrassment is linked to bashfulness. And what's fascinating further about embarrassment and shame is how we understand when young boys and young girls have it for a while. But at a certain point, they have to come into their feet and develop into the world and be able to take on life's challenges. When you see a boy who is overly awkward and feels shame and embarrassment at things that he shouldn't, you would feel he needs to kind of come into his shell, needs to really put himself forward, because in job interviews he's going to need to speak up and be assertive sometimes to sort of make an impact. And charisma goes a long way in the job market. Now, what's even more interesting is if you examine how Cersei Lannister, essentially, in Game of Thrones, the lady with the bell was like shame, shame, and basically Cersei's hair was totally ruined and she had to go nude in the street as a mob of peasants, crude peasants, verbally said things to her as she walked to the Red Keep because she had to atone. Now, thinking about atonement and embarrassment, it's really linked, because how do you break somebody and make them submit to you in this way with the sense of atonement, right? It's like you want that person to be leveled down to where you make them reimagine that sense of shame, right? And this is what's interesting in cinematic history, is when you as a woman can sympathize with Cersei, because you're like, that would be absolutely horrible to endure, right? But she goes through it and comes out stronger, so it has the opposite effect of what the High Sparrow wanted, right? He wanted her to feel a deep sense of shame and remorse so that she could become a sort of religious woman. It just turned her into a very vengeful and tyrannical figure. So for me, that showed how shame can go the opposite route. When you hyper-focus on somebody, it can bounce back on you, and it didn't have the effect you wanted. And I find that to be quite fascinating. And further, when it comes to Amy Sin says, I'm wondering now what is the difference between humility and shame. They seem similar. Now, humility is interesting because it's like the lack of pride and arrogance, right? When shame is more of like, I feel like it has a sense of like, not dirtiness to it, but where someone feels like, I never want that to happen again. Whereas humility is sort of like bowing your head and not puffing up your chest and having a bloated sense of ego, right? Shame is like you feel it and you don't want that feeling again. Humility doesn't wiggle in the heart, whereas shame kind of weighs upon you and you loathe it. You don't loathe humility, because you can find contentment in humility, but you don't find contentment in shame, right? That's another thing that's fascinating. Shug says there was an Egyptian girl years ago that falsely called the police for Islamophobia to hide that she had a Jewish boyfriend. She was taken to court and her family shaved her head because of her lying. That is interesting. That is very interesting. Yes, when it comes to women, the trimming of the hair has a very deep effect. And it's quite fascinating because the Native Americans, I remember when they would write stories about how the colonists would want them to trim off their braids, how this had a psychological impact on them to change their culture and whatnot. And the sense of deep awkwardness and embarrassment served as a tool to get them to change their ways. And so I really do enjoy thinking about the utility of embarrassment, because it's such a unique emotion and feeling. For example, like if you look at Hawa, Eve, and Adam, peace be upon them both, they discovered their nudeness, and it was just showed how innocent they were before, is that they were not made aware. And them, bam, being made aware really showed how we as humans became self-conscious. We were given this capacity to feel awkward, right? But then what's interesting further is when you have like a young individual who's going through their first stages of puberty, some of them, they feel so awkward in their bodies. You have to explain to them as a parent, like, it's just part of life. You know, you give them the tale of the ugly duckling. I don't know if you've ever heard of the tale of the ugly duckling, who later becomes a swan, but it was like a folk tale that we used to tell everybody and hear about. Like, you may not want to be nice to that boy or that girl, because right now they're kind of in their awkward phase, but later they might really blossom and bloom and turn into that swan. So you shouldn't be mean to them, and they shouldn't be crippled by embarrassment, shame, self-consciousness, and awkwardness, right? So their emotion, that temporary feeling, will go away and will essentially allow them to develop more into their humanness. Shug says, I read the story of the ugly duckling when I was little, but at the end I thought, wait, he's even more ugly than now, just bigger and larger beak. That's funny. That's really funny. Yeah, ugly beak, the swan. And so, if men were to say, you're emotional right now, to a woman, right? And let's say that emotion she has is awkwardness. Now, some might shoot back and say, hey, she has haya, she has modesty. Because I read a book called Fiqh al-Haya, right? And what's really interesting further in that area is you can see how at a certain age the shyness makes sense. And then as a woman, you kind of have to be a bit assertive, because you can't have that sweet, naive tone, because predatorial behavior creeps in. And some women who are victims of abuse, they feel a deep sense of shame, and then they don't talk about it. And you want your young ones to be able to feel, hey, you may feel embarrassed and shame, but you need to tell me what happened so I can help you, right? And predators really know how to get inside the mind of people to feel a sense of shame, so they never tell anybody what happened to them, right? Oh, you'll be ostracized, people will say this, your parents won't believe you, blah, blah, blah. And that individual is then crippled by the fear of shame, when in reality they should be bold, say, you know, I'm taking you to court, I'm calling the police and such, right? Another unique aspect of embarrassment and shame is, how does a fighter act after they lost? Because it's super embarrassing to lose a fight. And I've only lost one fight, and she was a chick who was much fatter than me. I'm not fat, but she was fat. Bigger. And when I had my backpack on, and when I went to turn, she clocked me from behind, grabbed my backpack, pulled me down, and then she sat on me, and then I turned, and she was just punching my back until somebody grabbed her by the hair and pulled her off, right? And that was the only fight where I felt a little bit like, it's the only fight I lost. And, well, it wasn't, everybody was like, hey, it's not a real fight, because she didn't stand up and actually fight. She got you when you was talking to somebody, not even expecting it, right? But this shame and embarrassment she tried to induce, because she knew I was a good fighter, was like, by catching someone off their guard, you're inducing a sort of awkwardness and shame within the community. And I was like, you know, I didn't ask for a rematch or anything like that. I was like, moved on. But it's fascinating how, if you look at professional fighters as well, how they act after a fight says a lot about how deeply that loss went under their skin. And if they have sportsmanship, they're not gonna really wallow in that embarrassment, and they may feel awkward when they leave the arena, but at the end of the day, they just have to get back on the saddle, right? And so the utility of embarrassment is necessary for us as humans, I'd argue. Helps us to know when to be modest, when to speak up, when not to speak up, when to let it not cripple us. It's such a delicate balance. Such a delicate balance. There was a comment up here that I wanted to read from Shug. Humility is knowing your level, but that the good in it could be taken from you. Shame is feeling sorrow for committing wrong or seeing wrong and feeling worry or apprehension about it. Very interesting, yes. The apprehension aspect is very much linked to embarrassment, and embarrassment is so similar to bashfulness, but bashfulness almost has a more playful tone to it, has a very kind energy to it, I'd argue. And so I found that to be quite unique when thinking about the utility of it. Let me know if you guys can still see the video, or if YouTube is lagging again and doing the thing with the chat. Okay, I saw Amy, so I know it's still working. Bashfulness makes me think of modesty. Yes. Yes. Because see, bashfulness it's like embarrassment, but less negative, I'd argue. It's less crippling, right? Shug says, nothing more awe-inspiring than seeing someone getting complimented have that blush in the cheeks because of bashfulness and sign of humility. Yes, that's true. Very true. Yes. And the difference in embarrassment also is, like in theater, you would see people feel very awkward on stage, but then you'd see somebody who was totally in their role, and you're like, yeah, they shouldn't feel. If an actor feels embarrassment on stage, they're not going to be that great of a performer, are they? You're not going to give a good show. And so, in certain job fields, embarrassment just can't be there, right? Think about if you were a doctor and you have to give some bad news to somebody. It's not a time for awkwardness and embarrassment. You gotta tell it like it is. Okay? The patient has to also be brave and allow the doctors to do what they have to do, but also be able to advocate for themselves. Right? Assalamu alaikum muwahid. And so this is also another unique expression of the human mind, of human behavior, and just how unique our emotions are. Now, in a world where women didn't feel embarrassment and shame, that'd be pretty hard to have a good wife, I'd argue. Right? So, if you've embarrassed your family, you embarrassed your community, heck, you even embarrassed your nation. Like, if you're an ambassador to another, like, you're an ambassador, you're going on behalf of your nation, you screw up, you know, it would be terrible, right? You embarrass your nation, you feel shame. There's utility to that. Act right. Shug says, Dr. Milahan to patient, I know that you've been doing and I carry on, but you'll be sleeping in your grave. Knock it off, you freak. Yeah. I could totally be like that, right? Just like, point, you know? And then I would tell them, get some chocolates on the way out, you know? Amy Lynn said, I could never be an actress. I tried auditioning once and walked out when all the women were asked to act out seducing one of the actors. Oh, that'd be, now I would feel some awkwardness at that. That'd be totally weird. I'd be like, at first I'd be like, there ain't no leather couch over here. What are you up to? Sneaky. Is this really acting or is this acting? Are we in San Francisco on Broadway? And I'd leave and ask, do I get a complimentary gift basket for being here? Do you guys, do parking tickets? When you go to park and you need the stamp in order not to have to pay for parking. Validate parking. That'd be awkward. And so I really do enjoy having this sense of embarrassment, but also being able to overcome it. Like if someone's like, "You did X, Y, and Z," I'm like, "Yeah, man. I messed up. I own it." You have to own it, right? But if someone tries to like blackmail you or like really dig it into your head and put that shame so deep in you that you almost get scarred and traumatized with PTSD, you have to be able to be say like, "Nah, you're not playing mind control with me. You're not gonna do that to me." Right? And who are you feeling shame for? Like, when I was a kid, my mom was a prostitute. My mom was a drug addict. My mom was, you know, out there. And when I walked home from school, people knew who my mom was. I didn't feel shame because I just had to live. Like, yeah, that's my mom. What are you gonna do? Everyone knows that's my mom. There you go. Right? But then, before that, what's interesting is when I lived with my grandparents and we were younger, my grandpa had, a really beat up old white van that he would sometimes drop me off to school in. I usually walked to school because I liked the snow and everything. And I liked to be inside my own head as I walk. But he would drop me off at school in his beat up old white van. And I would feel a sense of embarrassment and awkwardness and shame because people had nice cars. And so it's like, oh, I feel so embarrassed. Which, it was so dumb. You would think that I would be more embarrassed about my mom's reputation than I would about my grandpa's van, right? It's fascinating. It really is unique how embarrassment, this human emotion that makes us self conscious and feel awkwardness, operates within us. And it varies depending on our age and circumstance. England says that was at community college. Oh, there's always very unique liberals in the community college. So I'm not surprised that they wanted to be all weird and creepy. Shug says, due to litigation, so many doctors can't have frank discussions with patients about health, STIs, and more. Oh, that's true, huh? Oh, yeah, like the fat acceptance movement. I saw a whole series about women complaining that their doctors told them they had to lose weight, that was fat shaming. I should have shared it. It was months ago. You could probably find it on YouTube. But the fat acceptance movement is quite strange, where doctors are getting in trouble for telling their patients to have a salad. Shug says, oh, Big MK says, whenever I act upon an idea I have in mind, oftentimes I end up embarrassing myself. Oh, well, maybe it's the delivery of how you did it. It depends on what it was that was the idea, right? Shug says, and it is interesting as well, embarrassment that gets taught through social convention versus real embarrassment due to bad actions. That's a perfect point. Social conventions versus actually something bad that you did. It's almost like embarrassment, depending on who's using it, can really manipulate it. Issa says, nah, that's saving you money on insulin shots. Safai says, Assalamu alaikum from Morocco. Morocco in the house. And so, really, if you look at it as well, if men didn't have embarrassment, then you'd have like more people urinating in the street, pooping in the street. Because if you do public defecation, it's almost like you have no sense of embarrassment, no sense of awkwardness and shame. And unfortunately, in California, the homeless, they use drugs right out in the open. And they don't have any sense of shame because the drug has made the shame go away. Intoxicants make shame go away. Intoxicants make embarrassment go away. That's why, yeah, ambulance is also no sense of disgust, exactly. And so the pimps, they use intoxicants on their young women and the young male twinks so that they don't feel a sense of embarrassment. It's fascinating. When you see how alcohol and drugs take away someone's embarrassment, and then the person, when they're sober, they see it and they're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. Like, they feel like, oh, that's horrible. Then we come to see, like, there's definitely a tool of blackmail, a tool of weaponization, of abuse in many circumstances, because what I noticed is there'll be like these girls, they're very unique. They'll get drunk, and these guys will do things to them while they're passed out and record it and share it and totally shame the girls, and they're embarrassed and they feel awkward, and you want to help them to get over that, but it only really works sometimes if you make them see how the drugs and the alcohol remove that protection barrier. So embarrassment is almost like a protection barrier if you think about it, right? But if you don't learn how to manage it, you're going to have trouble in public speaking. You're not going to have charisma when you need it. And if you're introverted, you still want to be able to communicate with people. And if you're an extrovert, you have to make sure you don't lose the sense of embarrassment, right? That's another unique thing as well. People who are able to be the social butterfly having to have a little bit of embarrassment so they don't become too open bookish with the people they talk to. Shug says, if you want to see how frightening the drug life is, turn the volume all the way down on a music video and just watch the people moving back and forth. Really scary. That's a good point. It's so hard speaking to people in some of these countries because they have been encouraged to take part in high-risk sexual activity and drug use, and it's almost like a rite of passage. That is unique, the rite of passage, to sort of let go of embarrassment, shame, and awkwardness. Because when you are a person who is full of ego and you don't have a sense of don't sleep around, you're conceited. You're totally confident in your body. And this then makes it so you want to show everyone your body because now you're not shy anymore. Archive says, Salam, do you know about Afia Siddiqui case and Yvonne Ridley Converse story? No, I don't know anything about that. And so, hopefully, we can ignite a sense of decorum in people again. And to make them see like, hey, you're not a weakling if you feel awkward in doing something that is detestable. Right? It takes a lot of merit to acknowledge that, hey, what you did, not so cool. Right? It's a very beneficial emotion. Issa says, fentanyl is killing 600 people a year in my city. Yes, fentanyl is so deadly. And it makes people completely crazy. I mean, watching people that strung out and just not bathing and really letting themselves go is really gross. Jacko Radio says, I can be embarrassed now for some crazy things I've done growing up. Yeah, embarrassment can play a funny story, right? You know, I remember one girl, she was in the math class. She bent over and she farted, and she was totally embarrassed, but it made a funny story for ages. And it was like, oh, it's totally embarrassing, but it was a funny story. So, another person's embarrassment can be just a funny learning lesson as well, right? Fatuma Adam, assalamualaikum everyone. Salam, salam. Shug says, and just before the fentanyl movement, you had people sniffing or huffing bath salts. Oh, yeah, and then that one dude was chewing on someone's face. I remember that. Ugh. Every time I see bath salts, I become kind of terrified. That's so scary, man. I don't know if they fixed that, but it's just scary. But fentanyl definitely can take away your sense of embarrassment, can't it? Because it's so potent, it's so powerful. It's quite sad. Just don't huff them a lot. Yeah, right? Zain Solo, Salam Alaikum. I haven't been here for quite a while. Well, I'm glad you're back. Squad! Good to see some familiar faces in the chat. That's good. I'm glad you got the notification. And as you may know, the stream before was messing up, so if you see two streams, I'll make sure to try to keep this one up and fix it. Right? And so we shouldn't mock. My point is essentially with this video is to essentially not get rid of emotions, and especially the emotion of embarrassment. Safar says, Aslami, can you recommend me a book to learn Islam from scratch? I don't know, that's a big thing because I'm still learning from scratch. There's a lot of different ways you could answer that on which subject, which branch of knowledge. I don't think I'm the right person to ask. You would start with the Quran, and then you'd work your way to the Hadith, then work your way to niche subjects of fiqh and different aspects of the Sharia. Jacko Radio says, fentanyl and spice zombies are a terrible sight. Yes, they most certainly are. And then that's another unique thing is about just how embarrassment is a very good thing also in the customer service realm. Because you don't want people to embarrass your company and to make it a laughing stock. You want your CEO, your CFO, your all types of levels of your workers to present themselves in a way that doesn't embarrass the company. And I thought that was very unique when you examine how embarrassment operates within the corporate structure, even on the family business structure. It's quite telling. And so due to that, I would argue we have a lot to learn from it, right? Okay, fam. Family's home, and so I'm going to cut this off and go pray Isha. We lost some time earlier because of the stream messing up, so I didn't get to do the full hour because I did 16 minutes on the previous stream that got messed up, so we kind of have to cut it short because I was only planning to do about an hour, and we lost some time due to the technical difficulties, so forgive me for that. I'll try to make sure the next one is a full hour. And so just to review, we discussed embarrassment and its utility and its operation within the family unit, the spiritual sector, and how it's very important that people retain the ability to feel it, right? By the way, if you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there, and thanks for tuning in.